It was a Wednesday night when the knock came, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the quiet hum of our dinner. Lisa and I exchanged a glance, her fork pausing mid-air as her brow furrowed slightly. "Are you expecting someone?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. I shook my head. "Nope." "You?" She didn't answer, just pushed her chair back and stood, smoothing her blouse before heading to the door. I followed, more out of habit than curiosity, drying my hands on a dish towel. The sight that greeted us when she opened the door, though, sent a jolt of electricity through the air. A man stood there, his posture rigid, face pale, and eyes darting between Lisa and me like he was trying to decide which of us to address. He couldn't have been much older than 30, with neatly combed hair and a suit that screamed corporate drone. But there was something else, something off about the way he carried himself, like he was bracing for a fight. "Lisa," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "We need to talk." Lisa's face froze. Not the kind of freeze that comes with surprise, but the kind that comes with panic. She barely glanced at me as she stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door shut behind her. But not before I saw her lips move in a whisper, "Not here." I stood there in stunned silence, the towel clenched in my hands, staring at the closed door. My first thought was that it had to be work-related. Lisa worked in event planning, after all, and her clients weren't exactly known for their boundaries. But the way her shoulders tensed as she stepped outside told me this wasn't about a venue mix-up or a delayed payment. Curiosity won out over politeness. I crept closer to the window, peering through the slats of the blinds, and what I saw made my stomach drop. The man was talking, gesturing wildly, his face red with emotion. Lisa stood perfectly still, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She was nodding occasionally but never said a word. When he finally stopped, she reached out to touch his arm, her expression a mixture of sympathy and exasperation. And then, without warning, the man slapped her hand away and shouted something so loud it pierced the glass between us. "Tell him, or I will." Lisa recoiled as if she'd been struck. She said something back, too low for me to hear, and the man shook his head violently before turning on his heel and storming off into the night. When Lisa came back inside, her face was pale, her eyes avoiding mine as she muttered something about a disgruntled client and headed straight to the bathroom. She shut the door behind her, and I could hear the sound of the faucet running, drowning out whatever emotion she was trying to hide. But I couldn't let it go. That one sentence the man had shouted echoed in my ears like a thunderclap. "Tell him, or I will." Tell me what? What could this stranger possibly know about my life, my marriage, that I didn't? I stood there in the dimly lit hallway, staring at the closed bathroom door, as the first seeds of doubt began to take root. Whatever secret Lisa was hiding, I was determined to uncover it even if it destroyed me in the process. The next day, I woke up with that man's words echoing in my mind, "Tell him, or I will." Lisa was acting normal, too normal. She hummed in the shower, kissed me goodbye on her way to work, and even left me a note saying she'd pick up dinner that night. But something felt off. The silence after that man's outburst, her refusal to explain anything more than the weak excuse of a disgruntled client, wasn't just unsettling. It was infuriating. I wasn't going to let this go. At work, I could barely focus. Emails piled up, and my team had to remind me twice about a meeting I was supposed to lead. The image of that man on my porch wouldn't leave my mind. Who was he? How did he know Lisa? And what was he so desperate to tell me? The logical part of me thought I should confront her, demand answers. But logic didn't always win in situations like this. I needed proof, something solid before I accused her of anything. After work, I took a detour. Instead of heading straight home, I drove past Lisa's office. Her car was parked in its usual spot, nothing suspicious there. I considered going inside, pretending I needed to drop something off, but I stopped myself. She'd see right through that, and I'd lose whatever edge I might have gained. Instead, I waited. She left her office around 6, walking briskly to her car. I followed at a safe distance, my heart pounding harder with each turn she took. I kept asking myself if I was overreacting, if maybe this was all in my head. But then, she didn't head toward the grocery store like she'd promised. She didn't head home either. Instead, she drove to a small cafe on the other side of town. I parked across the street, watching as she walked inside. My pulse quickened when, 10 minutes later, the same man from last night appeared. He entered the cafe without hesitation, his body language screaming familiarity. They didn't sit near the window, but I caught glimpses of them through the glass, Lisa leaning in, her face serious, the man gesturing emphatically. I stayed in the car, debating whether to go in and confront them. But something told me this wasn't the time. I needed more. About 30 minutes later, they both emerged. Lisa looked composed, but the man was clearly agitated. He grabbed her arm, saying something I couldn't hear. She pulled away, snapping something back before getting into her car. He stood there for a moment, watching her drive off, then walked briskly down the street. I decided to follow him this time. The man walked for a few blocks before turning into a nondescript apartment complex. I waited in the car until he went inside, then noted the address. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but it felt like a piece of the puzzle I'd need later. When I got home, Lisa was already there, setting the table for dinner like nothing had happened. She greeted me with a kiss and asked about my day. I played along, trying to act normal while my mind raced. Over dinner, I asked casually, "Did you pick up dinner on the way home, or was it already here?" She didn't miss a beat. "On the way, of course," she said with a smile. A lie. I knew exactly where she had been. That night, as she slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts spiraling. I'd always considered myself a rational man, someone who didn't jump to conclusions. But this wasn't a misunderstanding. Something was happening, and Lisa was determined to keep me in the dark. The next day, I used my lunch break to do some digging. It didn't take long to find out who the man was. His name was Eric, and he worked for the same company as Lisa, only in a different department. He wasn't her boss, but he wasn't some low-level employee either. He was a senior project manager, someone who would have reason to interact with her professionally. But the way they acted last night was anything but professional. I also found something that turned my blood cold. Eric was married. His wife, Sarah, worked in healthcare, and they had 2 young kids. A picture-perfect family, just like mine. I decided to take things a step further. That evening, when Lisa left her phone charging on the kitchen counter, I scrolled through her contacts. Sure enough, Eric's number was there, saved under Work E. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The confirmation was enough. But I wasn't done. I needed more, something undeniable. So, I decided to tail her again. Over the next few days, Lisa's routine seemed normal: work, home, errands, but on Friday night, she told me she'd be working late to finish a project. It was the perfect excuse. I waited until she left, then followed her car at a distance. This time, she didn't go to the cafe. She went to a hotel. She didn't even try to hide it, walking straight inside like she had every right to be there. I parked across the street, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I waited for 30 minutes, then decided to follow. Inside, the concierge barely glanced at me as I made my way toward the elevator bank. I didn't have a room key, but I didn't need one. I saw Eric in the lobby, heading toward the elevators. He didn't notice me, too engrossed in his phone. I didn't follow him up. Instead, I went back to my car and waited. 2 hours later, they both came out. Lisa looked disheveled, her hair loose and her lipstick smudged. Eric gave her a quick hug before they parted ways. By the time I got home, my hands were shaking with anger. She wasn't back yet, so I poured myself a drink and sat at the kitchen table, waiting. When she walked in an hour later, all smiles and apologies about how late it was, I said nothing. I just watched her, studying every movement, every word, every detail. She thought she'd gotten away with it. But I knew. And now, I had to decide what to do next. The moment came faster than I anticipated. It was Saturday morning, and the kids were staying at a friend's house for the weekend. It was just Lisa and me in the house, the perfect opportunity to clear the air, or more accurately, to unleash the storm. I waited until she was settled in the living room with her coffee and laptop. She looked up as I walked in, her face lighting up with the kind of warmth I used to believe was genuine. "Morning," she said with a smile. I didn't answer. Instead, I sat down across from her, my eyes boring into hers. She noticed my mood immediately, the smile fading as her brows knit together. "Is everything okay?" she asked, closing her laptop. "No," I said flatly. "It's not." Her expression shifted, a flicker of concern mixed with confusion, or maybe it was guilt. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice cautious. "I know about Eric," I said, the words dropping like stones between us. She froze. Her body stiffened, her face turning pale. For a moment, it was like she'd forgotten how to speak. Then, she forced out a shaky laugh. "Eric? What are you talking about?" I didn't blink. "Don't lie to me, Lisa. I saw you with him at the cafe. I saw you both leave that hotel last night. Don't even try to spin this." Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked like she'd been caught in a trap and was scrambling to find a way out. "It's not what you think," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, it's not?" I snapped. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what I think. You've been sneaking around with him, lying to my face, and what? Hoping I'd never find out?" She stood abruptly, her coffee spilling slightly onto the table. "Okay, just stop," she said, her voice rising. "Let me explain." "Explain?" I shot back, rising to my feet as well. "You don't get to explain your way out of this, Lisa. I followed you. I saw it. I know." She threw her hands up in frustration. "Fine. Yes, I've been meeting with Eric. But it's not what you think. We're not having an affair." I let out a harsh laugh. "Do you really expect me to believe that? After everything I've seen?" She took a step toward me, her expression desperate. "It's true. He's going through something, and I was just trying to help." "Help?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "By meeting him in a hotel room? At night? Spare me, Lisa." She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Okay, yes, that part looks bad. But nothing happened, I swear. We just talked." "Talked," I echoed, shaking my head. "Do you think I'm stupid? That I'm some gullible idiot who's going to buy whatever excuse you throw at me?" Her eyes flashed with anger. "I never said you were stupid. But maybe if you trusted me." "Trusted you?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "How the hell am I supposed to trust you when you've been sneaking around like this? When you lied to my face about where you were?" She opened her mouth to respond but then stopped. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, she looked genuinely defeated. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said softly. "Didn't mean for what to happen?" I pressed. "Say it, Lisa. Just say it." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. I was beyond sympathy. "It was stupid," she said finally. "I made a mistake. But it didn't mean anything." I stared at her, my chest heaving with anger. "How long?" I demanded. "What? How long has this been going on?" I repeated, my voice cold. She hesitated, then muttered, "A few months." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Months? She'd been lying to me, betraying me, for months. "And you didn't think I deserved to know?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You didn't think I had the right to the truth?" "I was going to end it," she said quickly. "I swear. I just didn't know how to." "You didn't know how to stop sleeping with him?" I snapped. "Or you didn't know how to stop lying to me?" She flinched at my words, her tears spilling over. "I know I messed up," she said, her voice breaking. "But it didn't mean anything. I never stopped loving you." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, so that makes it okay? As long as it didn't mean anything, I'm supposed to just forgive you?" "No, I'm not saying that," she said quickly. I'm trying to make you understand. Understand what? I demanded. That you're a liar? A cheat? That everything I thought we had was a joke? She didn't respond, just stood there with tears streaming down her face. For a moment, the room was silent except for the sound of her soft sobs. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Why, Lisa? I asked, my voice quieter but no less intense. Why would you do this? What was so wrong with our life that you had to go looking for something else? She shook her head, wiping at her tears. I don't know, she said weakly. I was confused. Things haven't been the same between us, and I felt. Don't you dare blame this on me, I said, my voice like steel. Whatever problems we had, this was your choice. You didn't come to me. You didn't try to fix things. You chose to lie. To cheat. She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew, now a stranger in front of me. Her apologies meant nothing. Her tears meant nothing. She'd shattered the trust between us, and no amount of words could put it back together. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room. My mind was racing, my emotions a tangled mess. I needed space. I needed time to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I spent most of the night awake, staring at the ceiling and replaying the confrontation in my head. Every word Lisa said felt like it had been laced with daggers. I was confused. It didn't mean anything. Empty excuses for deliberate choices. By the time the sun rose, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. She thought she could betray me, make me look like a fool, and come out of it with nothing more than tears and a half-hearted apology. She was wrong. The first step was preparation. If this was going to work, it needed to be flawless. I spent the next week meticulously gathering evidence. The hotel visit was just the tip of the iceberg. I wanted everything: the texts, the emails, the times they'd gone out together when she said she was working late. I wasn't just angry, I was determined to expose her lies in a way she couldn't deny. I started small. I installed a discreet tracking app on her phone while she was in the shower. It wasn't difficult, Lisa was as trusting as I had been. The app gave me access to her location, call logs, and messages. What I found wasn't surprising, but it was damning. There were dozens of texts between her and Eric, many of them far from innocent. Plans to meet, conversations about their feelings, and even jokes about how I'd never suspect a thing. That last part fueled my resolve. She thought I was clueless. That I'd never catch on. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. I didn't confront her again. Instead, I played my role as the oblivious husband perfectly. I kissed her goodbye in the mornings, asked about her day when she came home, and even initiated a couple of date nights. It wasn't easy, pretending everything was fine, but it was necessary. She had to think I was still in the dark. Meanwhile, I was building my case. I took screenshots of her texts, noted every location she visited, and even recorded a couple of their phone calls. The things they said made my stomach churn, but I forced myself to listen. I had to know the full extent of her betrayal. Once I had everything, I started planning my next move. I wasn't just going to confront her again. That would be too easy. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she'd done, to see the destruction she'd caused and know it was her fault. One night, while she was out working late, I packed up my things. Not everything, just enough to make it clear I wasn't coming back. I left her a single note on the kitchen counter, taped to a stack of printed texts and emails. The note was simple: this is why. Don't contact me. But I wasn't done. The next day, I went to Eric's house. I hadn't planned on involving his wife, Sarah, but after everything I'd uncovered, I felt like she deserved to know the truth. I knocked on her door, feeling a strange mix of nerves and satisfaction. When she opened it, I introduced myself and told her we needed to talk. At first, she looked confused, maybe even a little suspicious. But as I laid out everything, showing her the texts, the emails, the locations, her expression shifted. Confusion turned to shock, then to anger. She didn't cry, didn't scream. She just sat there, staring at the evidence, her jaw tight. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally, her voice steady but cold. "I'll handle this." I left feeling vindicated, but not satisfied. Eric and Lisa had both betrayed their families, and now it was time for them to face the consequences. I sent an anonymous email to their HR department, attaching the same evidence I'd given Sarah. It was risky, there was a chance it could come back to me, but I didn't care. They deserved to lose more than just their families. Over the next few weeks, I stayed out of the house. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, avoiding any place Lisa might go. I didn't block her number, but I ignored every call and text. She tried everything, apologies, promises, even threats, but I refused to engage. Let her sit in the mess she'd made. Then came the fallout. Eric's wife filed for divorce immediately, citing adultery in the paperwork. Word got out at their workplace, and both Lisa and Eric were called in for a meeting with HR. Lisa was terminated for violating the company's ethics policy, and I heard through the grapevine that Eric wasn't far behind. Lisa showed up at my apartment a week later. She looked terrible, puffy eyes, disheveled hair, a shadow of the woman I'd once loved. I didn't let her inside. "Steve, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "We need to talk." "There's nothing left to say," I replied coldly. "I'm sorry," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'll do anything to fix this. Please, just give me another chance." I stared at her, feeling nothing but contempt. "Anything?" I asked. "Yes," she said quickly. "Anything." "Then leave," I said. "Leave me alone." She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably on the doorstep, but I didn't waver. Eventually, she left, and I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. I didn't feel victorious. This wasn't a win. It was survival. A necessary retaliation against someone who thought they could destroy me without consequence. But at least now, I could move forward. Lisa was a part of my past, and that's where she would stay. A month had passed since I left Lisa. The apartment was starting to feel like mine, sparse but functional, a place where I could think without the weight of betrayal hanging over me. I had ignored her calls, her texts, even the one time she'd waited outside my office like some desperate teenager trying to win back her prom date. I was done with her games, her lies, and her excuses. Or so I thought. On a Friday evening, there was a knock at my door. Not the timid tap of a delivery driver or the casual knock of a neighbor. This was insistent, deliberate. I knew it was her before I even got up from the couch. I opened the door to find Lisa standing there, looking thinner, older. Her eyes were rimmed red, and her hands clutched a stack of papers. "Steve," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to talk to you." I didn't step aside. "We've said everything we need to say." "Please," she insisted. "Just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." I considered slamming the door in her face, but something in her expression stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe I just wanted to see her squirm a little longer. I stepped aside and gestured for her to come in. She hesitated before walking in, her eyes darting around the room like she was trying to read how I'd been living without her. She sat on the edge of the couch, clutching the papers like they were some kind of lifeline. I stayed standing, arms crossed, waiting. "I know I don't deserve this," she began, her voice shaky. "But I need you to hear me out." I didn't say anything. I wasn't about to make this easy for her. She took a deep breath. "I've been going to therapy," she said, glancing up at me like she expected some kind of reaction. When I didn't give her one, she continued. "I've been trying to figure out why I did what I did. And I've realized how much I hurt you. How much I destroyed." "Destroyed is right," I said, my tone flat. "So why are you here?" Her grip on the papers tightened. "Because I want to make things right." I let out a bitter laugh. Make things right? Lisa, there's no making this right. You can't undo what you did. I know that, she snapped, her voice cracking. I know I can't fix this, but I need you to understand. No, I interrupted. You need me to forgive you so you can feel better about yourself. That's what this is about. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. Not anymore. That's not true, she insisted. I'm not here for me. I'm here for us. There is no us, I said coldly. There hasn't been for a long time. She flinched as if I'd slapped her, then shoved the papers into my hands. These are for you, she said, her voice trembling. It's everything. Every lie, every mistake, everything I did wrong. I wrote it all down because I wanted you to have the truth. I stared at the papers in my hands, a mix of anger and disbelief bubbling up inside me. You think writing it down makes it better? I asked. You think putting it all on paper erases what you did? No, she said quickly. But I thought maybe it would help you understand. Understand? I repeated, my voice rising. Lisa, the only thing I understand is that you chose him. Over me. Over our life. Over everything we built together. And now you want what? Closure? Redemption? She broke down, burying her face in her hands. I want you to see that I'm trying, she sobbed. I'm trying to be better. For you. For us. I tossed the papers onto the coffee table. Don't do that, I said sharply. Don't pretend this is about me. This is about you. Your guilt, your shame, your need to feel like you're not the bad guy. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. I know I'm the bad guy, she said. I know I ruined everything. But I love you, Steve. I never stopped loving you. I shook my head, feeling a strange mix of pity and disgust. You don't love me, I said. You love the idea of me. The safety, the stability. If you really loved me, you wouldn't have done what you did. She stood, her hands shaking. So that's it? You're just done? I nodded. I'm done. She took a step toward me, her eyes desperate. Please, Steve. Just tell me what I can do. Tell me how to fix this. You can't, I said simply. You broke it, Lisa. And some things can't be fixed. She stared at me for a long moment, as if she was searching for some trace of the man who used to love her. But he was gone, buried under months of lies and betrayal. Finally, she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Okay, she said softly. I'll go. She turned and walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the knob. For what it's worth, she said without looking back, I am sorry. I didn't respond. I just watched as she opened the door and walked out of my life for the last time. When the door closed, I sank onto the couch, staring at the papers she'd left behind. For a moment, I considered throwing them in the trash. But instead, I picked them up and started to read. Not because I wanted closure, or understanding, or any of the things she hoped for. I read them because I needed to remember. To remind myself why I could never let her back in. The silence after Lisa left was heavier than I anticipated. For a long time, I sat staring at the stack of papers she'd handed me. Her confession, her attempt at penance. I didn't want to read it, didn't want to give her the satisfaction of knowing I cared enough to see her side of things. But I knew it would eat at me if I didn't. I needed to know the full extent of what she had done, even if it felt like rubbing salt into an open wound. I started with the first page. It wasn't handwritten like I'd expected. She typed it out, every word carefully chosen, the formatting too neat to be spontaneous. It read more like a statement than a heartfelt letter. She detailed how it began harmless conversations at work, a mutual camaraderie that turned into flirtation. It wasn't planned, she said. It just happened. I stopped reading for a moment, the bile rising in my throat. Nothing just happens. Every choice she made, every boundary she crossed, was deliberate. She didn't trip and fall into an affair, she chose it. But I kept reading. She described the first time she met Eric outside of work, how she told herself it was innocent. Drinks at a bar, venting about their jobs. Then it escalated. The texts became personal, the meetings more frequent. She claimed she felt a thrill, something she hadn't felt in years. I paused again, this time slamming the papers onto the table. A thrill? I had spent 15 years building a life with her, making sacrifices, working to ensure she and the kids had everything they needed, and she wanted a thrill? But I kept going, compelled by a mix of anger and morbid curiosity. She detailed the first time they slept together, how she convinced herself it was a mistake she wouldn't repeat. But she did. Again and again. She described how she rationalized it, how she compartmentalized her actions to avoid guilt. She even wrote about how she looked at me some nights and wondered if I knew. The part that stung the most was her admission that she wasn't sure she would have stopped if I hadn't found out. By the time I finished reading, my hands were trembling. It wasn't just the anger, it was the sheer weight of betrayal. She hadn't just cheated on me physically. She'd lied to me, over and over, while looking me in the eye and pretending we were okay. Everything about our life, our marriage, had been a facade for months. I leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. For all her words about regret and wanting to make things right, it was clear she didn't fully grasp the damage she had done. She wrote about her feelings, her confusion, her pain. But what about mine? Where was the acknowledgement of what she had taken from me? My trust, my dignity, the life I thought we were building together, it was all gone. That night, I sat down with a legal pad and started to outline my next steps. I wasn't going to let her drag this out. I'd already spoken to a divorce lawyer, but now I wanted to expedite the process. I wanted full custody of the kids, at least temporarily, until we could figure out a schedule that worked for them. Lisa wasn't a bad mother, but her judgment was questionable. If she could lie to me so easily, how could I trust her with the truth when it came to them? The next day, I filed the paperwork. It was surreal, signing the documents that would officially end our marriage. The clerk at the courthouse barely looked at me as she stamped the forms, but for me, it felt like closing the book on a life I'd spent 15 years writing. A life that, it turned out, had been full of lies. Lisa called me that evening. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, her voice shaky, begging me to talk to her. She said she understood why I was angry, but she didn't want the kids to suffer because of her mistakes. That was rich, coming from her. The kids were already suffering. They just didn't know it yet. I called them that night, letting them know I was coming to pick them up for the weekend. I didn't mention Lisa, didn't say anything about what was happening. I wasn't ready to tell them yet. When I arrived at her house, she opened the door and tried to speak to me, but I brushed past her, heading straight for the kids' rooms. They were excited to see me, oblivious to the tension in the air. As we drove back to my apartment, I glanced at them in the rearview mirror. They were laughing, talking about their day, completely unaware of the storm brewing around them. It was a bittersweet moment. I wanted to protect their happiness, their innocence, but I knew I couldn't shield them forever. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, meetings with lawyers, and trying to establish some sense of normalcy for the kids. Lisa tried to reach out multiple times, but I kept our conversations strictly about the logistics of the divorce and the custody arrangements. Every time she brought up reconciliation, I shut her down. There was nothing left to save. One evening, as I was tucking the kids into bed, my son looked up at me and asked, "Why isn't Mom staying with us anymore?" The question hit me like a freight train. I sat on the edge of his bed, trying to find the right words. "Mom and I, we're going through some changes," I said carefully. "It doesn't mean we don't love you. We both love you very much. We're just figuring out how to be the best parents we can be." He seemed to accept the answer, but the look in his eyes told me he knew there was more to it. Kids are smarter than we give them credit for. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Relief because it was over, because I could finally move forward. Sadness because it shouldn't have ended this way. We had been partners, or so I thought. We had built a life together, raised kids together. And now, it was all reduced to signatures on a stack of legal documents. Lisa sent me one last message after the papers were signed. "I'm sorry for everything. I hope one day you can forgive me." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Life didn't magically get better after that. It took months to feel like myself again, to rebuild the confidence she had shattered. But slowly, I found my footing. I focused on the kids, on my work, on the things that mattered. And while the scars of her betrayal would always be there, they became part of my story, not the defining chapter. As for Lisa, I heard through mutual friends that she moved out of state, took a job in a new city. We don't talk, except for the occasional text about the kids. She's a ghost now, a shadow of a life I left behind. Looking back, I don't regret how I handled it. I didn't let her break me. I took the pain, the anger, and turned it into something constructive. And in the end, I learned that sometimes, the hardest thing to do is the right thing. I let her go. And I let myself heal.